Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the HBCU Learning Collaborative. On behalf of the leadership and the staff at the Center to Champion Nursing in America, I thank you all for taking the time to join us today for this important discussion. The Future of Nursing Campaign for Action is happy to bring today's webinar focused on support programs for nursing students and recent graduates. Before we go too much further, I want to mention that we are recording today's webinar. So if you miss a section or you would like to pass it along to a colleague, you will be able to find the recording by going to www.campaignforaction.org/webinar. And the recording has begun. I now have the honor of introducing today's presenters. And to save time, I will not read their full biographies, but they are also available on the website along with the recording of today's webinar. Our first presenter this afternoon is Dr. Evelyn Hoover, who is an assistant professor at North Carolina A&T State University. And our second presenter will be Dr. Deborah Stamps, who is the Executive Vice President, Chief Nursing Education and Diversity Officer at Rochester Regional Health. Thank you for joining us today, and please, Dr. Hoover, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's good to see you and to be able to share with you what we're doing here in North Carolina A&T School of Nursing. At the end of my presentation, I'll be asking you to share what you're doing at your universities that would help us here in North Carolina A&T School of Nursing. Next slide. So, remember back for me, it was back in 2019 that I was first introduced to this project. And as with all of us, there's other work to do, even though we know that there are certain things that's very important that we have to get in where it fits in and when we can get it done. So I'll start this with our introduction as to what is mentoring. And what we did was to ask that question of our alumni and our students and our faculty to get their response on what mentoring looked like to them. Because certainly I had that information already in our toolkit about what is mentoring. We recognize that as professionals that we have mentors in a very short period of time and a very long period of time. Just last night, I received a call from someone who said, "You mentored me." Honestly, I couldn't remember that, but she was able to tell me what I did and said that helped her along the way. So when I think about mentoring, I think about a creek with rocks. And in those rocks, the water is flowing around. But as you step from one rock to another, you gain a different perspective of the creek. So for me, mentoring in the School of Nursing is helping the student to gain new perspectives as they progress through the nursing program and on to their nursing careers. So why do we need to be mentored or have a mentor in school? We called together the nursing students finally from 2019. We finally got a meeting of our junior nursing students who entered in this summer. And we asked them that question: why do you think you need a mentor based on the information we provided? They self-identified to help them, basically, to help them, to navigate through the nursing program. And we tried to assure them that that is what we are expecting also, that there's someone outside of school, outside of the person who's going to give you a grade, evaluate your clinical, outside of that, that can give you words of wisdom, just listen to you, or just to encourage you to keep on keeping on. Why should I be a mentor to nursing students? This question we ask of the alumni. So North Carolina A&T School of Nursing has a School of Nursing affinity group, which are the graduates from the nursing program, and they contribute scholarship money for our students. And they start to ask the question, often they ask that question, what can we do? What can we do to help our students to, increase their pass rate or increase their retention? Certainly doing little Ziploc bags of snacks is good for the moment, but it's not as long lasting. So we talk to them about being mentors, and many of them have volunteered to be mentors. So I have a long list of names, addresses, emails, and phone numbers. Working with the president and also with one of the members to be the contact for the alumni persons. So we have all of that information from them. We have the information from the students, from our Office of Student Services, of their names and email addresses. So originally, one of the holdups of doing our mentoring program was the meeting. We were looking for a meeting place, either on campus, off of campus, face-to-face, an afternoon or evening of socialization and networking. But as we all know, March came COVID, and we were not able to complete what we had envisioned. So as this summer, as I said, we did a Zoom meeting first, and then we had a face-to-face, because when students were able to come back this summer, we also brought in the alumni to speak to them and to share with them about their journey through nursing and the wonderful careers that they've had or are having in nursing. Then we talked about the expectations of the mentor and mentee, of course, that confidentiality of information, but we also want to identify, which we have not yet, we want to identify the items or subjects or topics that would require reporting. For example, if a student should report that they had certain types of abuse, what to do about that, where to report it. I think that is one of those things that we need to have a way of reporting and to whom to report, to maintain confidentiality. So that little piece has not been worked out. But as far as the meeting part of the expectations, we expect the mentor and mentee to meet at least one time a semester, just once in a semester. We encourage that they would meet more often, but I think that knowing that it's just one time and you get to meet someone and get to learn about that person, that they will encourage one another to be able to meet more than once. But we don't want it to be overwhelming on the mentor or the mentee. What are the no bars to reporting? Oh, I skipped down to the bottom. That is what that part that we want to be sure that is clear. No bars, abuse or assault or harassment. But we need to have in place, because the mentors outside of the campus, how would they report that if it's happening with a student who reported to them? So that little piece, I think we're going to have to go to our legal system, our lawyers here on campus, to help us to figure that out, because we certainly want to make sure that it's clear and that the steps are known. Next slide. So we used the information that we already had in the kit to establish the mentor agreement form as well as the mentee agreement form, which is also in these slides. So this is what they filled out and submitted to the person who's collecting them. That is to develop a mentoring relationship for both the mentor and mentee. They must feel that discussions of private issues or problems are being handled with discretion. And the purpose of this agreement is to protect both the mentor and mentee from a breach in confidentiality during the mentoring process. They agreed to keep it confidential, the specifics of the discussions, unless given permission to share the information with others. Because, you know, students might be talking really bad about instructors or, you know, other situations that may be occurring. So we wanted to make sure that that is confidential and they know it. They also encourage you to discuss any concerns about having their mentor experience with the mentoring program. The mentoring program coordinator will maintain confidentiality unless a breach of confidentiality is necessary to maintain someone's personal safety. I understand that a copy of this agreement will be given to my mentee mentor, and I also will receive a copy of his or her signed agreement. So once we match them up, then that will be part of the exchange of information, a copy of that. Next slide. So in order, that was the agreement, and the mentees also have the same agreement. But then we ask these questions. We have a set for the mentors and a set for the mentees so that we can match them up. Now, at the time of this report, we have not done the matchup. We have received the profiles because we had a deadline last week, but we have not met yet to download and look at the profiles and begin to match them up. We have 48 junior students, 23 senior students, and 17 accelerated students. Okay, so they provided this information. Part of that is in a given week, when are you generally most available? What is the focus of your nursing career? And 5 words, how would you describe your personality? Because you want to, you know, put happy people with happy people. What would you like to gain from your participation as a mentor? What do you need to know about your student mentee in order to have a better sense of where they are in their life? Again, you know, this should help us to do the match. Now, of course, when we get to doing the match, we'll find out if these questions were helpful or if we needed additional questions. Next slide. Okay, so the student's profile, they had to list 3 goals that they think the mentoring program will help them to achieve, and 3 things that they would like the mentor to provide on their behalf. And then also to discuss their future educational and career goals. So we didn't ask them as much because we know that students don't want to take a lot of time filling out forms. So we want to keep it as short, as sweet as possible to encourage them to get it done. Next slide. And then this is where we are. We are at the best we can. This is where we are at this time. We want to do the match, and we have a schedule to start meeting next week. Again, we have an alumni member who's volunteered to help, and I would be the faculty person, as well as a person from our Office of Student Services. So at least 3 of us, we will be working together to do the matching. Next slide. So, do you have suggestions? We certainly would welcome them.
Well, I don't know that I have a suggestion, but I do have a question. So it looks like you have 3 groups of students who are going to require mentoring. You said that it sounds like you have 3 people who are going to work with you?
To do the matching, to
And
look at
so-
all the profiles and do the matching, yes.
Where will your mentees come from? Your mentors come from?
The mentors are the alumni.
And so will each alumni have more than 1 mentee?
No, we have more than enough.
So you have enough to assign a one-on-one.
We have enough to assign a one-on-one.
And so all of your students will be in the program.
All the students who submitted their profile.
So how about the ones who do not? Are they encouraged to participate, or it's just totally voluntary?
It's totally voluntary. They are encouraged. Certainly, we do want 100%. We have sent the profile. We have reminded them of the profile 2 more times to submit their profile. And so if anything comes in before we do the match, yes, we will include them, but we will go with what we have at that time.
So now, will your mentors have an orientation meeting to make certain everybody's on the same page? Or, I mean, will you do this by Zoom, or how will they get together?
Okay, so that's a suggestion. An orientation of our mentors beyond email.
Correct.
Yeah, and if that's what you're looking for, Dr. Hoover, in the toolkit that was provided in the workshop, there is a section of that toolkit that speaks specifically to mentors, and it provides a good first level orientation for them, so that if you and you should have that toolkit electronically, you have it electronically, so then you could share that with your entire pool of mentors, and that might help them to to become prepared and orient themselves.
I just want to make a comment and just congratulate Dr. Hoover. I love the buy-in that you got from the college president. I think that's influential. And also the fact that you guys did reach out to the alumni, because they always want to give back to the students, but we don't always have a specific answer for them. And so this time you were able to really narrow down what it is or what it was you really needed. And so I think it's wonderful, and I think you guys are off to a great start. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, kudos to you for the substantial amount of work that you've been able to accomplish and apply all of what we talked about in the workshop. It's pretty clear and it's evident in how you're going about the process. So we will be waiting to hear the next report out from you. Are there any other questions before we move on to Dr. Stamps?
Oh, I did have my hand up, but
Okay.
I wanted to say again, kudos as well to your program, especially involving alumni. That's amazing. I just wanted to share, and I'll put it in the chat, that in Pennsylvania, we do have a toolkit for mentors and mentee mentorship programs, and in that is resources for trainings for mentors. So I'll put that in the chat. You're welcome to use as you wish. Anyone is on this call. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for sharing that additional resource with the group. Any other comments or suggestions before we move on? Okay, so if there are no more comments specifically to Dr. Hoover, we'll move on to our second speaker, Dr. Deborah Stamps.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. DeWitty, and thank you again for the opportunity to share what Rochester Regional Health is doing regarding the transition into practice nurse residency program. Next slide, please. I'll give you a brief overview of Rochester Regional Health, our RN residency program, practical nurse, and advanced practice nurse residencies. Next slide. Rochester Regional Health, just to give a little bit of background, we cover just over 3,000 square miles and provide healthcare services throughout New York, from the western part of New York up to the northern part of New York. Next slide. We have 9 hospitals, just over 4,000 nurses, almost 20,000 employees. Our emergency departments see just over 230,000. We have a home care agency. We are fully integrated. So wherever you enter our health system, the expectation and goal is that you receive the care, regardless if you're in one of our rural hospitals or one of our tertiary service areas. Next slide, please. Wanted to tell you a little bit about our nursing workforce. So from a race, ethnicity, and gender perspective, we have just over 4,000 nurses, of which 335 of them, or 7.6% of them, are African-American or identify as, and 3.7% identify as Hispanic, 2.1% identify as Asian, and then we have a small percentage that identifies with 2 or more races, and the majority of our nurses identify as female. Next slide. So wanted to share with you the residency program that we have. So we actually implemented this back in early 2019 in a response to the need for retention of nurses and that transition to practice. We were seeing a number of nurses that complete their nursing programs struggle. After orientation, what can we do to provide a little bit more support? And so we went through an exercise of, do we create our own homegrown program, or do we partner with an organization to purchase a program? And then we wanted to make sure that we were having collaborative relationships with all our schools in our area. So the target population was nurses that were newly licensed and had less than 12 months of experience. Next slide. This is just a reminder of the Institute of Medicine's report from 2010, where recommendation 3 spoke to implementing nurse residency programs and supporting nurses in the transition to practice. Next slide. There were a number of benefits. First and foremost, the retention of the first year of employment. The evidence really shows that if you can retain new nurses in their first to third year, they're over that hump, the light bulbs go off, and they become, I call them sticky. They stick with the organization. And providing the support is really important, from that novice to competent or expert practitioner, regardless of their role. And it addresses the challenges. And for us in the hospital environment, or it could be the long-term care environment, or in the ambulatory practices, because they're all different. The cultures are a little different. And again, wanting to make sure that we are strengthening that commitment that we have to the nursing profession, but also engaging with the residents of the program to ensure that they're going to stick it out. We don't want to lose nurses in their first few years of nursing. And then we want to make sure that when we surveyed, that what we found was there was a commitment to the profession and the organization. They had an increase in their confidence. Because a lot of the times when there's a new nurse, a new graduate, it's really about that confidence, along with building the skills and ensuring that they had clinical leadership that supported them and that they had an interprofessional team to work with. Next slide. So the model that we used, again, we partnered with an outside organization to bring this program into our health system. And it covered all of our hospitals, as well as we have over 300 office practices, and we have 6 long-term care facilities, along with home care as well. So the residency program really builds upon what they learned from a curriculum perspective in nursing school. It was a participation of all new graduates, the completion of an evidence-based project, and I'll share some of those examples with you from our first cohort, that they interacted with experts from around our organization. So some of our speakers were leaders in other parts of our health system. So it could have been our CFO from a budgetary perspective, one of the chief nursing officers, Someone in pharmacy, for instance, we had the leader, the vice president of system pharmacy that came and spoke with them as well. And then it overall supports their professional development. We also, again, we have a number of academic partnerships with our schools of nursing, and then we were able to evaluate and get feedback for benchmarking and further evaluation and adjustments to the program. Next slide. So our first program, we admitted 180 newly licensed registered nurses. Those nurses worked in our 5 acute care facilities and our 2 ambulatory sites, those that were specialty medicine, and then the primary care, again, over 300 sites. And then the program was 12 months in length. Next slide. When we chose or selected the organization that we worked with to implement our residency program, we wanted to make sure that we had data. It was really important that we were able to get data and feedback from the residents, and then also be able to make some, course corrections if we needed to, feed that information back to the nurse leaders at the unit level. Because it's one thing for us to know it, but if the leaders don't know, they can't make the changes that are needed to, again, retain the nurses. And then we had a dashboard that was available to us, so you could actually drill down by department, or whether it was the advanced practice nurse, the registered nurse, or the practical nurse. We had a 1-hour presentation for our senior leadership to understand the program. There was site facilitator training, the evidence-based curriculum that is used, and that's updated annually. We also wanted to ensure that we had a program that could be CCNE accredited. We didn't want to have a program that, is just a program. We wanted it to be of the highest quality, meeting the highest standards. Networking occurred. There were monthly webinars to keep us current, and then there was a yearly conference. And this organization provided 10 years worth of data showing that their program, when implemented, had a retention rate of 93% of the nurses. Next slide, please. So the curriculum focused on leadership. And so we had presentations, again, from our learning and development team to our chief nursing officers and other leaders. Our chief medical officer, for instance, also came and talked about leadership from a system perspective and that interdisciplinary piece. Quality and safety. It's really important that nurses know their role around quality and safety. It's interesting that sometimes the perception about quality and patient safety is, oh, nurses go there when they're at the end of their career, but it really is a really inspiring, impactful career. When you think about quality indicators, right? When you think about a patient having a heart attack, there's some standard care that has to be given, the aspirin within so many minutes and so on and so forth. A patient having a stroke, all those quality measures, nurses need to understand that. Understand the cost of poor quality. When a patient receives, or not receives, but gets a CAUTI or a CLABSI while they're hospitalized, there's a cost not only to the patient, but to the organization. And so really understanding those concepts are really important in the nurse's career. Interprofessional collaboration. Nurses don't work alone. We work with respiratory therapists, we work with the food nutrition team, we work with the environmental service team. And so really understanding how we all work together and to provide that highest quality of care to our patients. And then professional development. We have a track that you can, and we provide this also from a certification perspective. Once these new nurses have their time in, their experience, they're able to advance on our clinical ladder. We have a 4-level nurse clinical ladder that we educate them to and get them ready to at least advance on that first level at the end of the program. We also have a certification program so that nurses can go on and get a national certification in their specialty, where we provide the review course. We have tutoring and supplies for review, and there's a whole process around that. So they can continue professional development that goes beyond the residency program. The evidence-based practice piece is where they really research a problem or identify a question, and do the work around an evidence-based practice that can be implemented at their unit or department level. We talk a lot about self-care, especially now with the pandemic. It's really important that nurses take care of themselves. If it's getting your pedicure once every couple of weeks, or you're getting a massage at some frequency, or just having the time to decompress, just taking that time to be mindful, whether you're on the job, off the job. But self-care is really, really important. We've seen that with the pandemic even more so, and especially for a nursing student too. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a foundational 3 courses that everyone in our health system participates in. We talk about unconscious bias, we talk about the microaggressions, and we talk about the culture of an inclusive work environment. And then death and dying. I don't know that there's any ever a time that we don't experience death and dying, whether it's a patient that we're directly caring for or supporting our team when they're experiencing death and dying. Next slide. So how did we bring this all together? So we had a speakers bureau, like I mentioned before, and the subject matter expert was either experientially or educationally able to provide the content. They had to complete a C&E approval packet and be approved. They submitted their bio and CV. And if they weren't able to be present, they had to have a backup, and that person had to go through the same process. So for instance, for myself, I would speak on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but if I was unable, I had our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion ready to step in and be consistent with the message that we're delivering. We had a number of volunteers, and even though it says volunteers, these individuals were paid for their time, but these are nurses that were baccalaureate degree or higher, and they had the commitment that they needed to come 1 to 2 hours in a day per month, 1 day per month, to be facilitators. So imagine if we have 180 nurses and we had groups of 10 to 12, we had to have that many facilitators. So after the mandatory education was complete, then there was facilitation that happened around discussion, application, people debriefing, really very interactive. And then each of these facilitators had to go through 2 hours of training. Next slide. Our next cohort, our cohort that just completed in November of 2020. Now, mind you, we started before COVID, and then we went through COVID. So we switched from a face-to-face model, and we also were on Zoom and being very creative during this time. We had a large attrition. We started out again with 182, and we graduated 87 nurses. A lot of nurses either just couldn't get away because of the hours they were working during the pandemic. However, we still felt that this was very successful in our first cohort, and the fact that we had 8 evidence-based projects that came out of it was also pretty amazing during a pandemic. Next slide. So the next few slides, I'm going to just share with you some high-level data from each of our hospitals. So at the beginning of every of the cohort, the nurses completed a Casey Fink progression tool survey. This really looked at their readiness for professional participation. And as you can see at Rochester General, the nurses scored higher than the benchmark. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Unity was above the benchmark, except for at the 12-month mark. We saw improved performance at United Memorial Medical Center. And then in the Eastern region, we had, we were below the benchmark, but it was very hard to get participation from the nurses for the next 2 milestones. And then next slide. Our ambulatory, we had a lot of incomplete data, so it wasn't able to be analyzed like the others. Next slide. The overall program evaluation, the overall program was rated lower than the national. data. And where the other opportunity we had was in the preceptor. The feedback, the qualitative feedback around the preceptor and the program was the change from face-to-face to Zoom. And then the opportunity to participate was really hard as the time went on because of COVID. And with the preceptor, it was really hard. Many times they were working in, challenging situations where you didn't always have your preceptor to continue on that relationship with you through the residency. Next slide. So these were the evidence-based projects that were initiated and completed during this time at the various hospitals. So I'm not going to read them verbatim, but we, for instance, the discharge nurse's role and the impact on patient outcomes to decrease readmissions. Unity Hospital, the communication between the registered nurse and the patient care technicians, and the central line associated bloodstream infection prevention. They actually looked at the alcohol impregnated caps as a way to implement those to decrease central line infections. United Memorial Medical Center looked at the new grad orientation program and its relationship to retention. Next slide. And then at Rochester General, which is our largest hospital, they had a number of evidence-based projects. Who should we call? This was really interesting around nurse NG2 placements and, who do you call for management? And then the emotional and psychological effects of isolation among hospitalized patients, interventions to decrease consequences of isolation. And all of these were implemented at the unit or department level across our health system. Next slide. So in long-term care, majority of our licensed practical nurses work in our long-term care facilities. And we had 15 newly licensed practical nurses that attended. This program is a little different from the RN in that it lasts over 2 years. Next slide. The program objectives, again, were to provide support, to develop clinical leadership skills, bring evidence into their practice, look at the lifelong learning and the opportunity for socialization and role integration. Next slide. So the first year, all of our programs really start with the core orientation and then the specific orientation to nursing. And then they go into the residency. So for instance, and this was sort of a timeline example on the topics that they were taught. Again, the same model, having a facilitator, having the lectures as well. So learning styles, team steps, the better together, how to work as a team in the starfish model and so forth, death and dying, regulatory compliance. The crew and shoe is actually the utilization of a clinical research utilization form where they actually read an article and they're able to identify what the problem was. It's answering a question that they may have. So it's really exposing them to evidence-based practice, which practical nurses don't get a lot of. Next slide. And then in year 2, they would actually develop a PICO question with the research, we have a nurse researcher and a librarian that works with the nursing team, and again, create an evidence-based review and to try and solve a problem at their unit level. So maybe it was pressure ulcers, maybe it was resident falls, maybe it was, a feeding guideline of some sort, but they would have that opportunity. Next slide. Awesome. And then the last residency program we have is the advanced practice one. And so what we found was nurses who graduated as nurse practitioners or clinical nurse specialists still had the gap and the need, even though they were registered experienced nurses, for that transition to practice in their new role. So again, their program focused around leadership courses, They have a number of critical care simulations. We use our sim center. They attended weekly grand rounds and the weekly M&M morbidity and mortality conferences in the various departments. They had some central line and airway management that they actually did in our simulation center. And they were able to really earn 50 CME credits over the course of the year. We actually graduated 8 individuals over the course of the last 18 months, and they're working in surgery, cardiology, ICU, and hospital medicine. All right, next slide. Thank you. I know that that was a lot really fast, but I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Stamps, for such a comprehensive description of your program and the outcomes that you've been able to achieve. It's pretty obvious that you invested a lot of energy, a lot of resources into making this a reality. So now the floor is open for questions. You can unmute yourself and speak up, or if you want to add something to the chat box, you can do that also. I did have while we were waiting to see if anyone raises their hands, I did have one question for you, and that is, you mentioned that, so what happened was you purchased the curriculum and then recruited the faculty to deliver the program. Is that what it was?
Yeah, so the company that we partnered with provides the dashboard so that we're able to track and trend our data. And they also have curriculum. And so that content is created, the outline, the course outline. And then we, our experts, make it a little bit more personal or applicable to our health system. But there's a core set of content that we start with from the organization.
Okay, thank you. And I see, Karen, you've got your hand up.
I do. I have a question. It sounds like you've got a pretty awesome program going there and you guys are working hard. I know in nursing ed, it's always hard to find preceptors. So I see you rely heavily on preceptors in practice. What kind of incentive do you have for them to participate?
Great
do you
question.
give them extra pay, or do you give them, I don't know, 2 weeks in the Poconos? How do you do it? How do you recruit them?
That is an excellent question. And so at our health system, precepting is really part of our culture. And so nurses who precept are able to use that on their clinical ladder towards their performance overall. We've had pockets where we have said, you know what, we're gonna, pay a stipend for preceptorship. It has not made a difference in getting preceptors. Part of our philosophy and culture is that we give back. And so giving back is through, bringing someone along with you. When on the side the hat that I wear with our academic partners, we have capstones that are provided where we provide the nursing staff to be that preceptor. And it's really just the recognition. They get a nice letter, they get some recognition from the college and university, and that means a lot because they're continuing to build their professional portfolio, and that's what makes a difference for them. Internally, for the residency programs, the commitment from the nurses to be the facilitators and to be the preceptors and the mentors is really about ensuring that they look at it as an opportunity that they have to educate and prepare someone to work side by side them. And so that's their investment in their units and their departments by ensuring that they have a good experience for the new person that's coming on board.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Dr. Stamps? You mentioned,
I'm sorry.
go
I'm
right
sorry,
ahead.
I just had a comment. Just an awesome program that you've presented here. I'm amazed, especially with the 180 participants. So how do you coordinate, all of that between, like, what does the staff look like?
Great question. So for the 180, We needed 18 facilitators because it's a 1 to 10 to 12. We worked very closely with our Chief Nursing Officer Council, where they identified nurse leaders in their areas. So they have clinical nurse specialists, nurse educators, some of our nurses that are on the clinical ladder at the level 3 and 4 were some of our facilitators. We put a call out through our what we call the weekly beat and said, apply, this is the program that's coming. So we had a large number of people who wanted to. The challenge we had was when COVID hit, no one could really break away, and so the facilitators became, we staggered the times so that because we had less facilitators, but we needed about 18 facilitators, and then the speakers, depending on the topic that month, that wasn't so bad to spread that out, across the calendar.
Great program.
You may have answered this already, Dr. Fitz, but I want to find out how many rounds have you guys completed? This Deborah Brabham here in Florida.
Yes.
How many rounds have you guys completed, and what's been the outcomes? Have you guys collected any qualitative data from the participants on any of the measures that you was hoping to achieve with them?
Yeah, great question. So we just started our second round. And so we're starting that with 142 new graduates from across the health system. And for the participants that started and completed the program, we have a 94% retention.
Very good.
The ones that did not complete the program, we had a 74% retention. Again, not sure what the reasons for them not being still with the organization.
Okay, so are they still so they are still employed? The
74% of them are from
Okay.
the ones that did not complete the program.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. And it's
Thank you.
exciting. And your graduates, they've already passed their state exam when they came to work for your hospital, or are they pending licensure?
For our health system just recently started hiring nurses on permit. Historically, we never did for years.
Right.
So these nurses that went through the first cohort, both the practical nurse and the registered nurse, were all licensed. This will be our first time having nurses on permit.
This is awesome news, because here in Florida, we don't utilize our LPNs to the full extent of their practice. But now I see that doors are starting to open up in my county, where major hospitals that are magnet are now welcoming, because of the COVID crisis and because of the nursing shortage. Now we're reaching back to pull them on, when really they have not been very friendly about opening up clinical space to educate the practical nurse. I suppose to write a big article about that one day, maybe when I retire, but yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So but thank God you guys still look to educate, mentor, encourage the LPN, because many LPNs go on to become RNs if they have the right dosage of mentorship.
Absolutely. That's actually, the other hat that I wear is our professional development. And so creating that seamless path from practical nurse to registered nurse. And so, we have a practical nursing program here. It's been around since 1964. We actually took the success of that program and submitted to our New York State Regents and Department of Ed to stand up a College of Health Careers, with our first program being a nursing associate degree program, and then utilizing our partners that we have for that +2, or we're actually looking to launch a 1+2+1 program in the near future. So to get that baccalaureate level of nursing at the bedside. But yes, there's definitely value in that interprofessional roles, even from our PCTs to our CNAs. How do we encourage them to go on to become nurses?
I'll be in touch with you. I'm going to be in touch with you, because I can use your model, your program, your model at your hospital to try to encourage and inspire the people who I work for. I actually work for our big major teaching hospital here, University of Florida, University of Jacksonville, UF Health and UF Health of Jacksonville. You know, they have the big college down in Gainesville. But looking at your model is something that I see that we could benefit from here on the First Coast. You're a little bit behind, you're a little bit more ahead. And I like to be able to call on people and look at your model and maybe say, well, maybe we should consider this model, you know, to help combat the nursing shortage in our area. And
Wonderful.
So they're not talking that language here in the South, here in Florida, unfortunately. But I would definitely be in touch. Hopefully I can get your information and maybe, like I said, when I retire here in a few short years from the college, which my college is LPN. We have a practical nursing program, but we do have the LPN, the RN transition, and I'm currently teaching in our RN, the BSN program. So it's an interesting method that need to be that we need to look at so we can streamline how we can do things better. That's my number one thing. I like to make things better. And a lot of my colleagues, they just don't focus on how can we do things differently if it's going to improve the outcomes of the patients overall.
Thank
Wonderful.
you so very much.
Thank you.
We have one more comment from Mary Jean Osborne, and then we'll be out of time. Go right ahead, Mary.
I'll make it quick. In terms of the students who come from the LPN program into the RN program and are hired by your health system, do they need licensure before they transition from LPN to RN education while they're employed by you?
Yes. So the one of the admission criteria for the registered nurse program that we have, the associate degree program, is that they have an unencumbered LPN license. We are working, also we have our application into the state for a traditional program where we wouldn't require the LPN licensure, because we've identified that a number of individuals that are interested are not LPNs. And so right now it does require that that you have an LPN unencumbered license.
Great, thank you. And thank you for a great presentation, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I would like to take this moment to thank our two presenters for such outstanding presentations this afternoon, and it's delightful to hear you share your comments with each other and plan to connect. That's the purpose of the Learning Collaborative. We learn with and from each other. Now, as we mentioned in the beginning, the webinar will be posted to the website, and feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. And if you're wanting to start your own mentoring program or think about progression pathways for the nursing profession, you might really want to share this with others. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and be sure to join us on Twitter, on Facebook, and sign up for the bi-weekly campaign update. Thank you again from the campaignforaction.org.